Dear students, I welcome you to EPG Pathshala. This is Professor G. Srinivas Reddy, retired Professor of Public Administration and currently Professor of Management and Dean, Aurora's Business School, Hyderabad. Today we bring you the presentation on public policy evaluation. Public policy process is a process comprising of three distinct phases. They are policy formulation, policy execution or implementation, and policy evaluation. A student should have clarity not only about how public policies are made and implemented, he should also know how they can be evaluated. Unless evaluation is done, one cannot really understand how policies have gone. Have they delivered the intended benefits to the society and people, or have they complicated the problems that are already there? To have clarity on these issues, scientific evaluation of public policies is important and necessary, and in this particular lecture we'll come to know how you can evaluate public policies.
As was mentioned, public policy is a process. In fact, it is a complex process comprising of three distinct stages. The first logical stage in policy process is known as policy formulation. The second stage is policy implementation. And the third and the last stage is policy evaluation. In today's module, we'll try to understand how public policies are evaluated. In this lecture is divided into 5 parts. In the first part, we shall come to know about the definition and conceptual aspects of policy evaluation. In the second part, we will come to know the policy impact. In the third part, we will get to know the problems in public policy evaluation. In the fourth part, we will understand the cost-benefit analysis in public policy evaluation. And in the final and the fifth part, we will attempt some conclusions. We'll come to the first part of the lecture, that is about the definitions and conceptual issues. Evaluation is an activity designed to judge the outcomes of government policy. It is a systematic process of determining the merit, value, and worth of someone or something, as mentioned by John Risley in his book Public Policy Evaluation. It is a process of measuring and assessing the impact and merits of government policies and programs. It is a means of determining and appropriateness, effectiveness, and efficiency of government policies and that are contributing to policy improvement and innovation. Public policy evaluation can be understood as learning about consequences of public policy, as per Thomas or Dye. Policy evaluation provides an overview of possibilities and limitations of public policy evaluation. Policy evaluation can be conceptualized as either an ongoing activity throughout policy making process or as a separate stage of policy cycle. The purpose of policy evaluation is to assess whether the policy objectives pursued were met and means that were employed to achieve these objectives. Generally speaking, public policy evaluation is concerned with estimation, assessment, or appraisal of policy, including its content, implementation, and effect. The public policy evaluation is a functional activity that occurs throughout the policy process and not simply as in the last stage. The public policy is centered on the operation of particular policies. The public policy is a systematic, objective evaluation to measure the then societal impact and the extent to which they are achieving their stated objectives. Thus, policy evaluation is a key component of the policy cycle or the process of conceiving, developing, implementing, and modifying public policies. Now we come to the second part, namely the policy impact. In discussing policy impact, it's important to have in mind the distinction between policy outputs and policy outcomes. Policy outputs are things government does such as highways construction, payment of welfare benefits, etc. These activities are measured with certain standards. They tell us little about policy outcome or policy impact. In trying to determine the policy outcome, our concern is with the change in the environment or political system caused by the policy action. Policy evaluation is concerned with determining the impact of policy on real life conditions. The determination of real effects or outcomes of policy is often a very complex and difficult task. The impact of policy has following important dimensions which must be taken into consideration in the process of evaluation. First, the impact on the public problem at which it is directed on the people involved. Those on whom the policy is intended to an effect must be defined. Second, policies must have effects on situations or groups other than those at which they are directed. These can be called either externalities or spillover effects. Many of the outcomes of public policy can be most meaningfully understood in terms of externalities. Thirdly, policy must have impact on current as well as on future conditions. Fourth, the direct costs of policies are an important element for evaluation. Fifthly and lastly, policies may have indicated costs that are experienced by community or some of its members. Such costs often have not been considered in policy evaluation, at least partly because they defy quantification. The evaluation of policy becomes most complex when explicit consideration is given to the fact that the effects of policy may be symbolic as well as material. Symbolic outputs include affirmation of values by elites, display of flags, troops and military ceremony, visits by royalty or high officials, and statements of policy or intent by political leaders, and are highly dependent on tapping popular beliefs, attitudes, and aspirations for their effectiveness. Symbolic policy outputs produce no real change in societal conditions. The analysis of public policy is usually focused upon what government actually does, why and with what material effects. Part 3, as was mentioned, deals with problems in policy evaluation. The most useful policy evaluation is systematic evaluation that tries to determine cause and effect relationships and rigorously measure the impact of policy. It's of course impossible to measure quantitatively the impact of public policies with any real precision. For rigorously measuring it, we require to assess carefully and objectively the impact of policy. There are a number of barriers or obstacles that may create problems for the evaluation policy. These are: 1. Uncertainty over policy goals. When the goals of a policy are unclear, diffuse, or diverse, as they frequently are, determining the extent to which they have been attained becomes difficult and frustrating task. This situation often is a product of the policy adoption process, which is based on support of multiple actors. Secondly, there is casuality. Systematic evaluation needs that a change in real life conditions must demonstrably be caused by policy actions. But in many cases, cause and effect relationships does not exist. The determination of causality between actions, especially in complex social and economic matters, is a difficult, though not an impossible task. Diffuse policy action. Policy action that affect other groups than whom they are direct. For example, an action of welfare policy may affect not only targeted one but also others, such as taxpayers, public officials, and excluded low income people. Official resistance is yet another factor. The officials who are involved in policy processes have fear of exposure of failure by the policy evaluation. They are concerned about possible political consequences of evaluation. Therefore, officials are reluctant for evaluation. Organization tends to resist change, while evaluation implies change. It creates an obstacle to evaluation along with more overt forms of resistance. Yet another problem is difficulties in data acquisition. A shortage of accurate and relevant statistical data and other information may handicap policy evaluation. The evaluation of policies is made in a variety of ways. Sometimes it is highly systematic, other times it is rather haphazard or sporadic. In some cases, it has become institutionalized. In others, it is quite informal and unstructured. A few forms of policy evaluation are legislative oversight, audit organizations, executive commissions, and agency action, etc. Besides this, evaluation is also made outside government. The media, university scholars, private research organizations, civil society, pressure groups, and public interest organizations, etc., and etc., all make evaluation of policy that have greater or lesser effect on public officials difficult and complex. They also provide the public with information, publicize policy action or inaction, sometimes advocate unpopular causes. It is often indicating in policy evaluation that intended policy goals or impact are not achieved due to following factors. The factors are 7 in number. Number 1, inadequate resources. Number 2, limited policy areas. Number 3, conflicting goals. Number 4, irresponsible people. Number 5, greater costs or overrun of costs. Number 6, the change in the nature of policy problem. And the last, the new problems may arise after implementation of a particular public policy. We come to the fourth part, namely cost-benefit analysis of policy evaluation. Cost-benefit analysis is the implicit or explicit assessment of the benefits and costs. Example, pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages that are associated with a particular policy. It's a technique of comparing all the costs, both visible and invisible, included in a particular policy action with all the benefits expected. The costs and benefits can be either material or symbolic. Following are the policy categories based on the allocation of costs and benefits. Number 1, broad benefits and broad costs. Policies that involve a broad distribution of costs and benefits, such as social security, highway construction, public education, defense, health, tend to become readily accepted, institutionalized, and beyond major challenge. The broad benefits and narrow costs. Some policies provide benefits for larger population, while their costs fall primarily upon faintly distinct identifiable groups in society. The policies related to environmental pollution control, public utility, regulations, mine safety, etc. are examples of it. Narrow benefits and broad costs. Policies are of benefit to identified groups, while their costs do not appear to fall upon any particular group. Aquaculture, subsidies, construction of hospitals and educational institutions, cleaning up of rivers, etc. are the examples of it. The costs of policies related to the above are in the form of higher taxes or prices that affect people generally. Those who benefit from their policies have a clear incentive to organize and to act to maintain them. Narrow benefits and narrow costs. Policies which are benefited a targeted group, but their costs fall on another distinct group, and they tend to generate organization conflicts among groups and their participants. This above classification is useful in gaining insight into responding to policies and to understand that policies vary in estimating what feedback response will be to policy action. This categorization is also helpful in analyzing the struggle that attend the adoption of policy, as to some extent the kind of policy proposed will help to shape the enhancement process.
Friends, we are in the concluding part of the lecture. I'll try to wrap up the lecture that we have had just now. Policy evaluation is a very complex process. Perhaps evaluation is as difficult as making a public policy or implementing a public policy because of the myriad problems that there are. Secondly, policy evaluation is the last phase in the public policy process. The intention behind saying this is it is only logically the last phase. Perhaps while making the policies, the policymakers are advised to know the possibilities or impossibilities of implementing the policy. Therefore, policy evaluation perhaps starts right at the start of the policy process, namely policy making. The policymakers perhaps may not make policies which are not probably possible to implement. So therefore, the policy evaluation runs the entire spectrum of public policy, but more logically it is the culminating process or culminating stage of the public policy process. There are different problems in policy evaluation. Perhaps the first problem is the objectivity of the policy evaluator. Policy evaluators are also individuals. They have certain political consciousness, they have certain social consciousness, they have certain likes and dislikes. Unless these people peel off all such angularities and view the public policy implementation or public policy formulation from an absolutely objective standpoint, they cannot really assess or evaluate the policy. But humans are humans. It's not possible for any one of us to be away from all our human limitations. This is one major problem. The second problem is the cost overruns. Many of the public policies, particularly the big projects like construction of river water dams or maybe a metro rail, for instance, in Hyderabad, there will be time overruns and cost overruns. Time overrun would also end up as a cost overrun. Cost overrun will come because of escalating costs in an inflationary economy. If there is inflation rate is very high, the cost, if it is slightly delayed, I think cost overrun will be there. Sometimes another problem is every public policy is aimed at solving some public problem. But the public problem is not constant. The nature of the problem will keep on changing. So therefore, in implementing public policies, just to borrow from mythology, it is something like the task of Arjuna, who has to hit the Matsyantra. The target is moving, and you have to hit a target that is moving, constantly moving. How difficult it is. The public policy also, if it has to be effective, it has to adjust the changing conditions, changing realities of public life. So this is one more problem. Yet another problem is the role of certain vested interests. In public policy implementation, the central actors, although there are so many other actors like the pressure groups and all that, but the bureaucrats are the central actors. And often the blame is put on the shoulders of the bureaucrats. So therefore, when public policy evaluation is there, there are many experiences where they evade data. They don't give the straight data, even if they give partial data. And they try to sometimes hide for understandable reasons that if the blame comes on them. The contributor to blame may be many actors, but the responsibility has to be taken by them. Sometimes resistance comes from them, and there may be other actors also who have something to hide from the notice or the gaze of the policy evaluator, and this may be one more problem. So like this, we have a number of factors that militate against scientific evaluation of public policy, but scientific evaluation of public policy is absolutely important. It is very difficult, though it's as difficult as it is important. Therefore, we have to invent ways and means of further developing the policy evaluation systems and processes so that we arrive at scientific conclusions about the success or failure of public policies that we implement in the public domain. Thank you very much, students.